On your Monday episode of Locked On Raptors, I've got a board, and it's big.
You are Locked On Raptors, your daily Toronto Raptors podcast, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
Hey, what's going on? And welcome to another episode of Locked On Raptors, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day. It is Monday, June the 24th, and I'm your host, Sean Woodley. I've been covering the Toronto Raptors now for 10 seasons on various platforms. You can find all my work over at the Hell website at Woodley Sean. You can find the show on Instagram at Locked On Raptors, and of course, you can join us in the Locked On Raptors Discord server. The link is in the description of the podcast. It's a great place to come hang out, talk ball, talk draft, talk what you're cooking at home, video games, the whole 9 yards over there in the Locked On Raptors Discord. We're going to have a live voice chat hangout during the draft on Wednesday. If you want to be part of that, come join us. We'd love to see you there. Link in the description, free to join as always. Of course, you can find the show for free on your favorite audio app of choice. You can follow, subscribe, rate, review, tell a friend, wherever it is you get your podcast. It's much appreciated when you support the show on the audio side of things. You can also join us on YouTube, subscribe to the channel, hit the little notification bell, and when you do that, you will get a heads up via push notification every single time the show is about to premiere or go live. Could have some impromptu live shows this week with breaking news abound and all of that. So go get those notifications sent to your phone to let you know when the show is on. Today's episode is brought to you by FanDuel. Make every moment more right now as the playoffs wind down. The sports stop sporting like we want them to, but this summer FanDuel is hooking up all customers with a boost or a bonus daily. That's right. There's something for everyone every day, all summer long. Visit FanDuel.com/lockedon to get started. We will get started here on an episode where I am going to detail my big board for the Toronto Raptors, specifically with the 19th pick. I think with where the Raptors are picking at 19 and 31, you can just assume the guys at the tail end of my big board here are guys who I would also have very high on my board at 31. There'll be some other names that pop up once more of the sort of higher end guys are off the board. We'll talk about pick 31 as the week goes on, but I want to focus in on 19 because that is the first pick. That is where the Raptors figure to get their most important future contributor in this draft among their two picks. We also know at 31, there's a chance he gets traded with the sort of, 16 hours between the end of the first round and the start of the second round, surely being a time at which the Raptors will field many offers for that pick. Who knows if it becomes something attached to Bruce Brown or whatever it might be, but that is, something to consider here. So we're not going to talk about 31 today. We're going to talk purely about pick 19. And before I get into my big board, I guess sort of the rules, the criteria. First, I didn't really include guys who I don't think will be there when the Raptors are up at 19. And look, this is a hard class to declare this guy is not getting that far. This has been a running joke in the Locked On Raptors Discord for months now. But, there are certain guys who they're mocked pretty regularly in the top 15. It seems like the range of the draft when you get to like the Sixers and the Lakers, there seems to be a bit of like a floor for some of these guys, just because a lot of the guys who might drop fit very nicely on those teams. The Heat at 15 also, it feels like there's just sort of like a backstop for some of these guys that they're just not going to fall beyond there. Of course, anything can happen. We saw Cam Whitmore drop last year. We've seen all kinds of drops in the past. And so I didn't go with guys who I don't feel like there's a high likelihood they'll be there at number 19. That said, if the Raptors were to get one of, let's say, Devin Carter, the point guard who's an incredible point of attack defender and kind of do it all, sort of jack of all trades guard on offense, if he's there at 19, hell yeah, I'm in for Devin Carter. Ron Holland, not my favorite prospect in the world, but if he falls to 19, the upside and talent and winginess of him certainly makes him worth picking. I think Rob Dillingham, the very small but extremely creative and exciting guard out of Kentucky, if he's there at 19, which I don't think he will be, I think there's a reasonable case to take him and just say, hey, you're our sixth man of the future, Rob Dillingham, and go forward with that. As much as the defensive concerns with him, I think, are very, very real. I think at 19, the offensive creation upside is just that high for him. Cody Williams is another one. Doubt he falls that far as one of the sexier wing prospects in this draft. He probably ends up going higher than is anticipated based on some of the recent reporting from the draft folks out there. But if he's there at 19, you scoop him up and are very happy. And Nikola Topic, if for some reason his recent ACL injury causes him to fall all the way to 19, I think you could take Topic easily. I think he's got some real good lead guard potential, if not nice six-man potential. And I think you take him at 19. So that's the sort of group of guys who, if they were to fall and slide to 19, that I didn't include today, that I think would be sort of ahead of anyone on the board I'm going to run through here momentarily. Also, just to kind of give it a little background of how I sort of do this. Look, I'm not a draft expert. I do not spend the whole year watching these guys religiously. I kind of pick it up when the Raptors get eliminated, dig into some tape, dig into some, scouting videos, read up on these guys. Shout out to wonderful resources like Sam Vecini. He's an incredible draft guide at The Athletic. No Ceilings. We've had, of course, Maxwell Bombach from No Ceilings on. They do some great work over there. Hoop Intellect, our pal Keandre from last week, a really wonderful YouTube channel. Floor and Ceiling, college basketball scouting, all of these different YouTube channels and written outlets, they help kind of inform my opinion. And then I'll take my own opinions from what I'm watching and kind of blend it all together and try to analyze and synthesize all of that into, sort of my hardened draft takes. Things I look for, I think fit really matters with this year's pick for the Raptors. I think the Raptors are in a spot where two of their pillars are in place. Emmanuel Quickley, Scotty Barnes, not going anywhere anytime soon. And so I think whoever you take has to be taken through the lens of, does he fit with Scotty Barnes and Emmanuel Quickley? I think I've done pretty well on that with most of the guys here today. A guy like Rob Dillingham, for example, maybe doesn't check that box, but has like pretty crazy creation upside and shot making ability and all of that maybe makes you overlook the lack of fit. But for the most part, I think fit really matters this year. Also, like upside versus floor. I know a lot of people tend to try to shoot for upside and take big swings. I prefer just guys who I think are going to be good NBA players and fit into rotations and be nice players on competitive teams to help drive positive basketball. And so I think I differ on some guys a lot more than others might, just because I, don't tend to be seduced by the idea of upside so much. I think when you're drafting at this part of the draft, the odds that someone makes good on their 1% chance of hitting their superstar outcome, if there is one even, I just think it's such a slim chance. I'd rather just take the safe bet and get guys who are going to be good basketball players to ensure you have no bad basketball players soaking up minutes for your basketball team. A couple of exceptions we'll get into coming up here as well. But for the most part, I'm a big floor versus super high upside guy at this part of the draft, at least. And then sometimes you just got to go with your gut. I think that's another thing for me is, you watch a guy, everyone has their own sort of personal preference, their personal sort of cup of tea in terms of types of basketball players and player archetypes. And when sometimes I'll just catch a guy and it doesn't take long, maybe just like 5 minutes of watching a dude to just sort of be like, yeah, I love this guy. He is like a dude I'm going to throw my weight behind, hitch my wagon to, et cetera, et cetera. And I think there are a few guys, especially in the top 3 or 4 of the guys I'm going to talk about here today, who I think check the box of just being a Sean-ass kind of basketball player, which again, I'm not an expert. I'm certainly more likely to be seduced by personal biases and preference of style of play than your classic scouting person would be, but it's fun. It's dumb. It's the draft. We are allowed to have our own guys and hitch our wagons and have declarative takes that end up being wrong down the line, because that's just the way the draft goes. So with that, no further waiting. Well, a little bit of further waiting. We're going to hit a quick break. We'll come back on the other side and we will dig into my big board. I'm going to rattle through the top 10 guys I have for the Toronto Raptors at number 19. We'll do that coming up in just one sec. Today's show is brought to you by our friends over at eBay Motors. Go check out eBay Motors, would you? It's a wonderful place to go with passion, drive, and patience. You're looking for the formula for winning championships. It's also what keeps your ride or die alive. eBay Motors has everything you need to maintain your vehicle and level it up to peak performance. Superchargers, roof racks, exhaust kits, LED headlights, and more. Whether you're into speed, power, or style, eBay Motors has got you covered. With over 122 million parts for your number one ride or die, you're always going to find exactly what you're looking for. And with eBay Guaranteed Fit, your part is guaranteed to fit your ride the first time, every time, or your money back. Because with eBay Motors, you're burning rubber, not cash. With all the parts you need at the prices you want, it's easy to make your car the MVP and bring home huge wins. Keep your ride or die alive at ebaymotors.com. Eligible items only. Exclusions apply. eBay Guaranteed Fit only available to U.S. customers. All right, let's dive headlong into my personal big board for the Toronto Raptors at number 19. And the first guy on my board, I've been talking about him for a while. I absolutely love him. It's DaRon Holmes II out of Dayton. Shout out to Fanspo, the wonderful cap machinations website that allows you to make a little personal big board here. And I have done that here for DaRon Holmes. ESPN has him ranked lower at 39. He's number 24 on Sam Vecini's board. I think DaRon Holmes is, to me, a lottery level player in this class. And that's because I think DaRon Holmes is just going to fit in to winning basketball in some way, shape, or form. He is, I think, a guy who, you might vary as far as what you think his upside is, but I think just all the different things he does. He's got a lot of front court positional versatility. I think with the Raptors in particular, you could see him playing in lineups with Kelly Olynyk as the sort of smaller, but there to protect at the rim 5. You could see him playing as more of a spacing 4, standing next to Jakob Poeltl. And I think he can also play in smaller looks with Scotty Barnes at the 4 and just kind of have those two out there flying around, blocking shots with some speed and some versatility and some some footwork that is really exciting to see. I think with Holmes, the bigger questions are on defense, like how does he hold up as a smaller big man? He's only about 6'9". He's got a 7'1" wingspan. He's not your typical stand in the middle and take up all of this space in the room with incredible arms and all of that big man. He is not your Rudy Gobert, your Zack Edey's, your gigantic, space filling bigs. He's probably not going to fit super well as like a drop big, but that's okay because the Raptors have themselves a more traditional drop big in Jakob Poeltl, and what they really need is some positional versatility in the front court. And I think DaRon Holmes can blend between the 4 and the 5 pretty effectively, and the Raptors have the bigs to complement what he does well and doesn't do so well. Whether he's playing with, Poeltl or Olynyk or Scotty Barnes or whomever else they might bring in down the line in the front court. I just think he can blend into a bunch of different roles. I think on offense, there's just like a lot of pretty good at a little bit of everything. Of course, the big thing for him is he shot near 39% on about 2.5 attempts from 3 in his last season at Dayton. Was not much of a shooter before that. Pretty low volume. Was a 14% shooter in his first season. His second season, he went up to 31% on about half an attempt a game. And this past season, his third year at Dayton, up to 38% on 2.5 attempts. Scored 20 points a game, 8.5 boards, 2.6 assists. And I think just the offensive package for him, there's a lot of pretty interesting stuff, right? Holmes can post up. Maybe not something he's going to do a ton in the NBA, but that's part of his toolkit. He can, obviously screen and dive and finish above the rim or finish kind of, catching the ball in the short roll area around the free throw line, put it on the deck, make a quick play and score. And I also think he can pick and pop. And I think he can attack a closeout out of a pick and pop. Just a lot of really connective stuff he'll do to kind of keep offensive possessions going. I think he's a nice passer. I think he's pretty good at kind of finding the next man and not sort of having it bogged down, even though he was asked to have the ball a lot at Dayton. And I do think I'm pretty encouraged by just the crazy usage he carried at Dayton and how that could translate to the NBA in a much more diminished role offensively. But just all these little things he does away from the ball, on the ball, like they all just kind of flow into what the Raptors want to do on offense, I think. He had a 63% true shooting percentage at Dayton this past season on a 31.5% usage rate. That's crazy. That is insanely high. He had really great metrics when it came to offensive box plus minus, defensive box plus minus. The defense, I think, the switchability, how he can stay in front of smaller guys in the NBA is probably the biggest question about him. I have said on this show, I think I'm higher on his ability to be more of a switchable defender than most seem to be. I just think he's like a pretty spry and quick athlete. I know he kind of moves like a big man, but I think in general, DaRon Holmes, just a pretty interesting moldable package on offense and defense that I think we haven't quite seen what the full extent that he can be yet. Like I think at Dayton, he was in this sort of, okay, you're the best guy in this team. You're going to be our rim protector on defense. You're going to be a big part of the offense and have the ball a lot. And I just think in a pared down role in the NBA, some of the stuff he does really well might level up with just more repetition, with it more being sort of siloed as far as what his role is. And I do think the upside for DaRon Holmes is like fourth best player on a very, very good team, starter in lineups that win minutes in the postseason. I think that's there for DaRon Holmes. He, for me, is number one on the Raptors board, and I think he is by a pretty comfortable margin. It's sort of like he's tier one for me, and everyone else kind of falls into a second tier. I think if I was an NBA GM, I'd be taking DaRon Holmes in the lottery. I would probably take him if I'm the Thunder at 12 to be that sort of power forward type they seem to need going forward. And that, frankly, they're the team I'm most scared of taking DaRon Holmes early and leaving him not on the board for the Raptors at 19. I've pitched my flag. I am a DaRon Holmes man, and I'm not apologetic about it at all. I think he rocks. Let's go to number 2 on my board. That's Kel'el Ware, the center out of Indiana. This is sort of, I referred to earlier, my preference for, high floor over high super duper upside. I think Ware is sort of the exception that proves the rule for me here. I think Ware, if it all hits for him, if the defense is as stout as it seems like it can be at his very best, with the rim protection and the sort of second jumps and the athleticism and just the insane length. He's 7 feet tall with like a 7'4" wingspan. He's enormous. He takes up a ton of space. He could be a traditional drop big. There might be some more mobility in there than there is for a guy like Jakob Poeltl, for example, to kind of change up the scheme a little bit. And plus, he shot a pretty ridiculous rate, 42% from 3 on, yes, low volume last season. But if that's real, if that's something that can translate to the NBA, he is your prototypical modern NBA big who can defend the rim, block shots, hit threes, play 5 out, and also score around the rim super effectively. That was really his best skill in the NBA. And to me, if you take Ware, he is the succession plan to Jakob Poeltl 2-3 years down the line. He's probably not going to be a finished product right away, but when Poeltl is moved on from the team, or maybe is more on the decline in the back part of that contract, you could have Kel'el Ware kind of step in and just sort of be a souped up version who also brings notably 3-point shooting if that really hits. The downside here is that he's like a Thomas Bryant level defender. And yes, he can shoot threes a little bit, but offensively, he doesn't do enough defensively to justify having his sort of niche offensive role on the floor. And that, I think, is the biggest concern. You also hear Christian Wood's name thrown out with Kel'el Ware, referring to sort of the feel for the game stuff, maybe the effort stuff, which has been a bit of a concern. Although, anyone you listen to or read about, writing about Kel'el Ware, they'll note that the effort stuff, the sort of, attention to detail got a little bit better when he went to Indiana after playing at Oregon the year prior. So maybe that's on the way up. There's certainly a way in which the bottom falls out entirely with Kel'el Ware, which maybe is surprising that I have him at number 2. I just think he's a game-changing big man if it all hits and becomes like a no-brainer long-term piece for you next to Scotty Barnes. It's pretty exciting to think about what Kel'el Ware can be. It's just, there's some stuff with the strength of his lower body. Can he hold a base against bigger bruising big men? Is he someone who can, captain a defense and be locked in the way you need to be to do that? All real questions, but I think if everything hits on Kel'el Ware, you'd have very little regret taking him at number 19, and he may end up being one of the better players in this draft if it all hits. Number 3 for me, Tristan da Silva, a guy who I don't know if he's actually going to be there at 19. He feels like one of the guys who goes to one of these winning, trying to contend teams in the 15, 16, 17 range, whether it's Miami, Philly, or the Lakers. Like, he just fits a team that's trying to win right now because he's an adult. He's 22 years old. He's a senior. He's an older prospect. He does a lot of things that just complement good players. He can be a connective wing for you, a good helping in team defender, maybe not the greatest lockdown guy at the point of attack. If he were, he'd be number 1 on my board. I think if he was that, clear, okay, this guy's going to lock dudes up and be that ace wing for you, I would be all in on Tristan da Silva as the best guy for the Raptors. But I just don't know if the sort of point of attack wing defense is going to be quite good enough to justify da Silva as like the clear number 1 here. I think guys like Holmes and Ware address the defensive needs the team has a little bit more. But either way, I obviously those guys aren't wings either, but I just think their big man defense could be pretty special if everything breaks right. But yeah, da Silva, just like an adult who knows how to play basketball, passes the knows where to stand test, is I just think going to be like a coach's dream type of player, and probably steps in and is a pretty effective player right out of the gate, as effective as rookies can be. But think like Jaime Jaquez, for example, just sort of stepping in and having plenty of experience in college and a pretty refined game that can just kind of slot into a lineup and play 8th, 9th man minutes kind of right away. I would love Tristan da Silva on the Raptors. I don't think he gets there to 19. And we'll finish it up here this segment before we rattle off my next 6 guys. But let's get to number 4 here before the break. That is Kyshawn George out of Miami. I think I'm probably higher on George than a lot of people are. And I understand the concerns with Kyshawn George, right? As much as he is like a dead-eye three-point shooting prospect, I really think that's going to be something that translates well to the NBA. I love his passing feel. I love his sort of off-kilter, herky-jerky style. He's not super fast. He kind of plays at his own pace. I've compared him to Kyle Anderson before, just in that sort of slow-motion way of moving. And I think it would be a pretty nice, yin and yang, a bit of a nice compliment to the, fired out of a cannon nature of RJ Barrett flying towards the rim, of Emmanuel quickly when he gets downhill, even Scotty Barnes and the bursts of power he shows. I think Kyshawn George could be a nice little change of pace, a little bit of second side creation when it swings to him and can put it on the deck. I really like his passing vision and feel. And I do think he profiles as a much better defender than people give him credit for. I think because he's quote unquote slow, there's this sort of perception that he's not going to be a good defender at the NBA level. I just think he's strong as hell, or has the frame to grow into being strong as hell. He's only 20 years old right now. Obviously, as a rookie, he's going to be overmatched in a lot of cases, but I do think the frame is just like big, bulky, long, wiry. He's got good hands on defense. And again, I think he's just like a smart player. He's like one of those gut guys to me. I look at Kyshawn George and I'm like, yeah, I would like watching this guy play for my basketball team. He's pretty cool. And again, the three-point shooting is very real. The concerns with him are the sort of stuff off the bounce where he can't quite burn a guy in one-on-one. He can't get around them and get to the rim super often. He never gets to the rim, never really dunks. And maybe that's a function of playing in a bad Miami team where the spacing wasn't great. And he was often one of the agents for spacing, standing away from the ball. But that's something that in the NBA, there have to be at least some improvement there. Otherwise, he's just basically one of these shoot threes and not much else guys on offense, which is not my favorite player archetype. But I do think there's some good, defensive wing potential in there. I think of all the guys we're going to talk about today, he probably has the highest upside as a wing defender. And to me, that is why he's number 4 for me. I would be totally happy if Kyshawn George were the pick at 19. I'm more of a believer than a lot of people are, but I think just give me a dude who can pass and shoot and defend and have good feel for the game. That is my kind of dude. Coming up on the other side, we'll rattle through the last 6 guys on my top 10 big board at 19. We'll try to go more rapid fire style. I wanted to spend longer, portions of the show on the first 4 because they are kind of my favorites. We kind of get into another tier going into number 5. And a shocking guy at number 5, at least to me, considering where I was at on this guy just even a few weeks ago. Who is it? We will get to that coming up in just 1 second. Today's show is brought to you by our friends over at FanDuel. I love sports. I love them so much that I never want them to stop. But as the playoffs wind down, we get fewer games and the sports aren't sportsing like we want them to. But FanDuel lets me keep the sports going whenever I want. All I got to do is open the app and dream up bets anytime if I'm in the mood. And this summer, FanDuel is hooking up all customers with a boost or a bonus daily. That's right. There's something for everyone every day, all summer long. Of course, there's plenty of stuff going on in the sports world. You got the WNBA, plenty of action to go and check out over there. Another thing to note as well, you look at the NBA draft, the odds to go number 1 in the draft at FanDuel right now, you got your Zachary Reese-Shays and your Donovan Klingons and your Alex Sars up high. But what if the team at top, the Atlanta Hawks goes, let's make the bet on Zack Edey, the Canadian 7'4", biggest guy in the NBA. The second he steps on an NBA floor, currently plus 30,000 to be the number 1 pick. He's on the board as a potential number 1 pick. It's a weird draft. We've seen a Canadian go number 1 in a weird draft before, Anthony Bennett. Just saying, maybe $1 on Zack Edey could get you a nice big payout. That is what I'd recommend you go check out on FanDuel today. Head over to FanDuel.com/lockedon and start making the most out of your summer. FanDuel, official sports betting partner of Major League Baseball and the Locked On Podcast Network. All right, rapid fire time to finish up my big board. The top 10 guys that I would like to see the Toronto Raptors take at number 10. Before we do that, a reminder, at number 19, that is. Before we do that, a reminder, Locked On Sports Today, 24/7, our all-day streaming channel covering all things sports. Local hosts covering the biggest stories in the world. Of course, you've got the Stanley Cup Final, the dramatic Game 7. The Oilers have come back from down 3-0. Can they complete the comeback? Locked On Oilers, Locked On Panthers, Locked On NHL, all covering it for you all day long ahead of Game 7 tonight, Monday night. It's going to be rad. All right, let's get to it. rounding it out, the next 6 guys I have on my top 10 big board for the Raptors at number 19. And look, this can change still. There's like 3 to 4 days left. I'm allowed to change my opinions, but this is kind of where I've settled on things for now. Let's go number 5. It's the shocker. Zack Ede. Look, I was not sure about Zack Edey. I think I went in feeling sort of like, okay, we're doing the thing where the Canadian that everyone wants is like better than we're saying he's better than he actually is because of the passport, all of that. And I've kept on thinking about it with Zack Edey. I've thought about it through the lens of the upside versus floor thing. I've thought about it through the lens of like what his role is going to be in the NBA versus what it was in college, where he was basically the center of Purdue's universe. They would dump it into him and he would score over dudes with little hook shots and floaters at will because he's 7'4" and gargantuan and no one could match his size. Like, that's still going to be the case in the NBA. He is freaking enormous, and that's got to count for something in a league where being enormous matters and kind of always has. I think my biggest reservation about Zack Edey that kind of had me a little lower on him is I just don't think he's a good passer out of double teams. I think that's our place where he really struggles. And I think in the NBA, you're not going to be able to run an offense through Zack Edey. You're not going to want to run an offense through Zack Edey because who wants to run an offense through post-ups, right? Like, unless you're Nikola Jokic, it's not really a viable thing to do. Joel Embiid doesn't even really run through post-ups a ton. It's not the most efficient play type that you'll see. But I kept on thinking about Edey and sort of what his floor in the NBA will be. And the comparison I made during the Edey episode I did a couple weeks ago, and that I keep on coming back to, is Jonas Valanciunas. Jonas Valanciunas, imperfect defender, not great foot speed. That's very much the case for Zack Edey, although it's worth noting that he's 7'4" with like a 7'9" wingspan. Being a little slow, you can make up for that when you are the biggest player in the NBA. And I think we'll see Zack Edey hold up just fine as like a drop big man. Maybe there are times where, guards are going to really cook him if he's dropping deep and he can't get up and contest those looks without also kind of manning the roll man. I see the reasons why it might not work, but all you hear about Zack Edey performed super well at the combine. The fact that he plays 30 plus minutes at his size and just like never misses time is kind of insane. Like Donovan Clingan is being mocked at number 1 in some places. And his whole thing is, can he play more than 22 minutes a game in the NBA? Like Zack Edey, that's not going to be a problem. I think you can argue that in a faster paced game, not sort of built on dueling half court possessions like the college game can be, and that Purdue certainly tried to engineer with the way they played. I think the sort of getting up and down in transition thing is a concern for Edey, but you know what's a good counter to that is being maybe the best offensive rebounder in the NBA, which I think he has the upside to be. I've kind of done a 180 on Zack Edey, honestly. I think he's probably not going to be there for the Raptors at this point at 19. If he is, I still don't love the fit. Like, I think the fit with Scotty Barnes can be tenuous. I think he overlaps too much with what Jakob Poeltl does on defense. And I think the foot speed concerns blended with Kelly Olynyk also being in that front court could be a challenge to overcome. And so he's not higher on my board because of the fit, but just as a pure player with a high floor, I think Zack Edey is going to be an NBA player. He's going to, at the very least, be a change of pace, excellent backup big. And if he can be a Jonas Valanciunas, or another guy you hear in reference to him is Ivica Zubac, those guys are starting centers in the NBA. Like Valanciunas, maybe not so much anymore, but there was a long time where he was. And again, it's like a matchup dependent thing. It's not always going to be perfect, but I think Zack Edey at number 5 on my board is kind of the place to put him, because I think there's a real chance that he's just like the highest floor guy that we're going to talk about the rest of the way here, just because being 7'4" with that interior touch and the size to protect the rim the way he can, just being there, it's pretty impressive stuff. I'm shocked he's this high too. And I don't love the fit, but I think as like a talent play and a floor play, I think it's maybe not the worst idea if he's the only guy left on the board among the big class, for example, and the Raptors really want to go big. I'm fine with it. Shockingly, it would be really fun to watch Zack Edey cook for the Toronto Raptors. I think that's something we can all agree on. Maybe we don't all agree on the ability for him to do said cooking, but if he does, if it works, if it hits, It's damn exciting. All right, got to rapid fire through the rest here. Number 6, I have Bub Carrington, the point guard out of Pitt, who I think, most people seem to agree has some of the highest shot creation upside in this draft. 6'4", 6'5". They listed 6'3" on Fanspo. I think he's 6'4", 6'5", based on his combine measurements. He just kind of has a profile of a guy who can be a lead creator for you, or at least a secondary creator for you. I think I'm a little less super high on Bub than a lot of people are, just because I think getting to the rim might be a problem for him in the NBA. He's got a bit of sort of a slow pace to him. Doesn't quite have that first step that puts people on their ass, but he does have just like pretty nice pull-up mechanics, both from 3 and from mid-range. Like, I think he's going to be at least a couple level scorer. And, in the NBA, when there's more space to work with, maybe you can kind of tap into more there. I also think you can play with Emmanuel quickly in lineups and kind of take some of the burden off. Maybe you want to have quickly running around screens and using his ample off-ball gravity. Bub Carrington could step in and run some possessions for you. Obviously, Scotty Barnes is going to do that a lot for the Raptors too. I don't love the fit defensively, and I think he probably takes a while to become anything close to a starter for the Raptors. But I kind of like Bub Carrington just as like a play on shot creation upside, even if there's a chance he just becomes kind of like a microwave 6-man type. Number 7, I have Yves Missi out of Baylor, the center. He's very big. He's very athletic. He's very bouncy. He also doesn't have a ton of offensive skill at this point. It's mostly just like dunks and putbacks. And you're really hoping he's like a transformative defensive player, which he could be. He moves super duper well for a guy his size. He's got the crazy long arms. I think Yves Missi is going to be a fine rim running big in the NBA. I don't think there's really any shot he becomes a 3-point shooter in the NBA. I don't think there's much chance he even becomes like a mid-range guy necessarily. He's going to be an around the rim player. And for that reason, I think the fit on the Raptors is just a little bit below where you'd want it to be. I think maybe he's got some more switchability than Jakob Poeltl does, but I don't know if it's like that much more. And I think you probably want him around the rim with his shot blocking prowess anyway. And so just because he does not bring much spacing at all, there's no mid-range stretch to him, nothing like that. And I don't think there's a whole lot in the way of passing vision. I think he probably ends up netting out as sort of like a slightly worse version of Jakob Poeltl, which is a fine player, and obviously a little bit more athletic than Poeltl, but, rim protector who is mostly bound to shots around the rim and putbacks. That, I think, is kind of what he's going to end up being. And he's got less passing juice, I think, than Jakob Poeltl does. So because of the fit, I've been toying with Missi a little bit higher for months now. Like I liked him, and then I've not liked him, then I've liked him again, and I've kind of waxed and waned. I think I'm in a wane phase with Yves Missi, and that's why I have him below Zack Edey as a fit among this big man class, with what the Raptors need and the fit and all of that. Next up, Isaiah Collier, who seems like he's going to be around when the Raptors pick. He's been a big faller in this year's draft sort of discourse. At one point, he was projected as potentially the number 1 guy about a year's time ago. And bad season at USC. The combine, he didn't measure super well. I think there was a hunch that he was like 6'5", but he's maybe closer to 6'2.5", 6'3". Pretty short arms. I think about 6'4" is his wingspan. 6'5" at most. I'm trying to remember what I read on the combine sheet. Either way, and I don't think I trust Collier as a shooter. I don't think I trust him as an off-ball player. I think he's got to be someone who just has the ball a bunch and is driving into the teeth of the defense and making things happen. He turns the ball over a lot. Not great sort of court awareness. He's not one of these point guards who I prefer, who, frankly, the reason I'm so in on Emmanuel quickly is I feel like he kind of got this element really quickly, which is just the ability to kind of have the finger on the pulse of the game, know the beats and rhythms of the offense, and sort of when to attack, when to, look to set somebody else up. I don't know if Collier really has that sort of ingrained sort of point guard brain that Emmanuel quickly, I think, really showed very in short amount of time that he does have an aptitude for. And because of that, I'm just kind of out on Isaiah Collier as a player. That said, if he's there at 8 and a lot of the guys ahead of my board are gone for some reason, if he's there at 19 and a lot of the guys ahead of him are gone for some reason, I think, there's some upside there that's worth taking. Like, there's a world in which he becomes like a Baron Davis type super duper athletic guard who gets to the rim a ton and has his problems, but is, still a very good player. And as a Baron Davis acolyte from back in the day, that would be awesome. I just think that's maybe a bit of a lower end outcome for him. I just don't think there's a whole lot in terms of high end offensive upside to tap into. Don't think he's much of a pull-up 3-point shooter. And that, to me, if you're not that as a lead guard, that is red flag number 1. Frankly, a guy who he reminds me of a little bit is Dennis Schroeder. Like, could be a really good athletic backup point guard for you, but if he's your starter, I think the limitations become kind of concerning. Next guy I have here, and actually I'm going to switch him out, and I'm going to have him at number 8 instead of 9, even though I've already got him listed at 9 on my board here. I like him more than Collier. It's Jaylen Tyson, the guard wing type out of California. For some reason, Fanspo didn't have his stats, but he was really productive last year on a very bad Cal team where he was asked to do a lot offensively. The thing I like about Jaylen Tyson is his craft. I think he's got just like a really good handle. I think he's got a really good sort of deceleration and changing of speeds and, quick little turnarounds. I compared him in the episode where I first talked about him to DeMar DeRozan a little bit in terms of just the footwork and the craft as an offensive creator who kind of overcomes maybe the, first step burst that he doesn't have just by being super creative and crafty with the way he goes and scores. And I do think he, similar to DaRon Holmes, was asked to do so much on Cal. He's going to have more of an off-ball role, more of a second side creator role in the NBA. And I think he can actually do that. I think there are some sort of detractors who think he maybe can't scale down to more of a role player niche, but he did that in his previous stops in college at Texas and Texas Tech. And, I think there is a chance that in a role where he's not the number one guy through which the entire offense is flowing, he is able to kind of hone in a little bit more in terms of like his team defense, his man-to-man perimeter defense. The 3-point shooting, I think, is going to be good as more of a catch and shoot enterprise than the pull-up stuff he was asked to do with Cal. I like Jaylen Tyson a lot. One of these dudes who just knows how to play basketball, to me, falls in the same category as a Kyshawn George, as a Tristan da Silva, just like super high feel that I'm pretty comfortable betting on being a good NBA player because he knows how to play basketball. And number 10 for me, surprised he's this high, but I was surprised by how much I liked his defensive upside. I talked about him in a very recent episode of the show. Johnny Furphy, the guard out of Kansas, or I guess more of a wing out of Kansas, 6'7", measures up to 6'8", 6'9" in some places, but Johnny Furphy, I think, not the sort of dead-eye three-point shooter you'd maybe hope that he could be, although there seems to be some upside there. But I just think defensively, he's got like a lot of athleticism and a pretty high sort of feel for the timing and the reads you got to make on defense, whether he's off ball or, on ball, I think is going to take some time, but I think he plays smart on ball defense. He kind of reminds me a little bit of Kyshawn George in that regard, where like the tools don't look amazing, but the sort of smarts and the understanding of how to play defense is certainly there. I like Johnny Furphy quite a bit for what he is. Again, he's number 10 on my board. If he's there at 31, I think he's a great pick. At 19, there are certainly guys who I'd like more, but I got no problem with Johnny Furphy if the Raptors do end up with him on the team. Again, I would prefer other guys, but all the guys here, I'm not going to be like despondent if the Raptors were to take him at 19. I think there's a case for all these guys being a decent fit with what the Raptors want to do. Guys who I'd be kind of peeved about the Raptors taking at 19, who certainly didn't touch my board. I've talked about Ryan Dunn. Not super into a guy who just has so little offensive production and upside and shooting acumen and all of that. I'm not in on Terrence Shannon Jr. I'm not in on, Bobby Clintman. I think I'm kind of out on. I talked about him on the episode. I talked about Furphy. I'm not a huge fan there. A lot of these guys would be more okay with them at 31 for sure, but that's my top 10. Oh, the other guy, Tyler Smith, would not be happy with Tyler Smith at 19 because I kind of just think he's a one-dimensional stretched big and not much else. So that to me is the final board for the Raptors at number 10. Again, subject to some change in the next couple of days, but I feel pretty good about that. Holmes 1, Ware 2, Da Silva 3, George 4, Edey 5, Bub Carrington 6, Yves Missi 7, Isaiah Collier 8, Jaylen Tyson 8, Isaiah Collier 9. I'm flipping those guys on the fly, and Johnny Furphy 10. That is where it all sits for me. Excited to hear what you think. Let me know if you disagree or agree with what I have here in the comments and in the Locked On Raptors Discord. Would love to hear from you in there. Until tomorrow, we'll be back again with an episode with Vivek Jacob. I will send you off into the rest of your Monday and hope you have a wonderful rest of your day. And we'll be back again with Vivek to kind of set the stage for the week ahead. What we want to see, the Bruce Brown of it all, the Gary Trent Jr. of it all, the draft, et cetera, et cetera. Big week for the Toronto Raptors here. The draft is on Wednesday, second round on Thursday. It's all going to happen. Free agency opens like 2 days after that. It's going to be a whirlwind. We'll be here with you, probably with more than just 5 episodes this week, frankly, and looking forward to covering it all for you here on the show. Thanks so much for hanging. We will talk to you again on Tuesday with another episode of Locked On Raptors. Bye-bye. There's my ball.